Hello everyone, welcome to Unit 7, Chapter 1. We are officially in the contemporary era, and today we are specifically looking at the years 1900 to 1914. Our learning goal for today is to explain how internal and external factors contributed to change in various states after 1900. And our first key concept is going to be examining the Mexican Revolution. Social order, political problems, and internal and external factors. So our biggest problem with Mexico is that we have a dictator in charge, Porfirio Diaz. He has been in power for quite some time, and he is very pro-United States, which although makes us very happy, not so much the Mexican people. Unrelated to that, they have a land distribution problem. This is caused from the hacienda system way back from Spanish colonial holdings, where privileged classes in the casta system, such as the Peninsulares and the Creoles, owned the large majority of land. This translates into 97% of the land being controlled by 1% of the Mexican population. Now they also have an external problem, and that's us. Economic imperialism is draining resources and limiting economic opportunity for Mexican citizens. So the Mexican Revolution will kick off in 1910 when Porfirio Diaz decides that he is going to host a democratic election. His opposition candidate, Francisco Madero, is wildly popular, however, so just before the election, Diaz has him jailed. This will lead to widespread rioting. Now, Madero escapes, and when he does, he kind of takes over organization of all of this forward motion, and this is how the revolution itself kicks off. Now, he does have help. He's not by himself. He has this guy, Pancho Villa. Pancho Villa is an extremely talented general, and he is able to defeat the Mexican forces. Now, mind you, if you're looking at this slide, you see that takes 10 years. And keep in mind that Mexico is getting some financial support from the United States at the time. We are really simplifying the Mexican Revolution for the sake of AP World History. But the long and the short is that it is not going to be a one-time deal. And part of it is because of this gentleman right here, Emiliano Zapata, also on the same side as Francisco Madero. He begins the process of redistributing land near the end of this revolution. Unfortunately, it is not well organized and breaks down into chaos. He is somebody who is either completely beloved by the Mexicans, aka the peasants in particular, or wildly hated, those with privileges or landowners. So what do we need to take away from this revolution? First of all, it will be one of many that are coming down the pipe. Secondly, 15 million people who lived through this revolution, and 2 million of them are going to die. This was an extremely bloody conflict. They will get a new Mexican constitution in 1917 that will address land redistribution, that will offer universal suffrage, which, to remind you, is the ability to vote. And I also might add, this will be before our own nation gets it, and it will guarantee public education for both males and females. But also, kind of a big get from this is the establishment of the Institutional Revolutionary Party. The PRI is what we will be referring to most of the year. And this political party will dominate Mexican politics until the year 2000. Not a single leader of Mexico will be outside of this party until 2000. Nowadays, we consider it pretty corrupt, but in the beginning, it wasn't always that way. So as I mentioned previously, this is one of many more revolutions that are coming the way of Mexico, as this political cartoon indicates, just one after another. They'll be a little complicated, but we have a review at the end of the year to kind of look at the big takeaways for each of these. We're moving on to a new key concept. We're going to look at the Ottoman, the Russian, and the Qing empires, and how they collapsed as a result of internal and external factors. And ultimately, this is going to lead to the Russian Revolution, which will establish communism in Russia, and a civil war in the Qing dynasty that is going to lead to the establishment of communism there as well. Let's start with Russia. If you don't recognize these individuals. They are Nicholas II and his family, the last members of the Romanov dynasty of Tsarist Russia. You may be more familiar with the story of the little girl to the right of the Tsar, Anastasia, otherwise known as Anastasia. But, spoiler alert, none of the family will survive the Russian Revolution, not even her. So the Russians had a great many internal and external problems. Let's do a quick peek at the external problems because these are ones that we have already studied. We said that pretty much Russia's going to have a really hard time winning any wars that they're fighting against anyone that isn't China. The Crimean Wars, the first one against the Ottoman Empire. Keep in mind that they weren't just fighting the Ottomans, they were also fighting a confederation of European backers. And then against Japan. This Japanese War is actually going to be one of the catalysts that is really going to turn the tide for the revolution inside Russia. But let's look at some of these internal problems. We have a very conservative czar, and he is not in any way promoting economic development through industrialization the way he ought to be. He is not expanding public education or any kind of education for peasants, and that is actually limiting his ability to develop economically. If you have an uneducated class, a very large uneducated class of people, they cannot do tasks in industry that require skill. He has not expanded infrastructure very much, roads and transportation in particular. But if you consider the size of Russia, that's not all that surprising. It is difficult for the Russians to acquire loans both inside Russia and outside, and the Tsar is very opposed to any kind of political reform because of his conservatism. So I could walk you through the events of the Russian Revolution, but on a PowerPoint video like this, it would be very boring, and it's not. Visit my website and watch the required video on the Russian Revolution. I will say that studying it without having looked at World War I yet is a little bit challenging, but the takeaway really is that if Russia was economically devastated by the Russo-Japanese War, this one will be way worse. On to the collapse of the Qing dynasty in 1911. Like Russia, the Qing were faced with a multitude of internal and external problems. Ethnic tension between the Han majority and the Manchurian minority limited the effectiveness of Qing reforms and responses to other challenges like Europeans. Agriculture was not growing at a rate to meet the increasing demands of the rapidly expanding population, so any climate or weather anomaly often resulted in famine, and there were a lot of famines. In addition, having an outdated bureaucracy based on Confucian tax systems did not generate the necessary funds to industrialize or address the growing impact of European spheres of influence. And if you needed to be reminded of it, clearly China's biggest external problem was those pesky Europeans imposing free trade on a country that really didn't want to purchase opium, mass-produce cotton textiles, or any other cold industrialized product, although eventually the bicycle would catch on and indeed become a very big deal. Let's fast forward to the actual revolution of 1911. Remember that the Empress Dowager Cixi and her son died in 1908, leaving an adorable 2-year-old Emperor Puyi to make important decisions about industrialization, foreign interference, the future of Confucianism, taxes, ethnic tension, and food shortages. That it took almost 3 years for a revolution to begin seems rather surprising. But our catalyst will be Western-educated Sun Yat-sen, leader of a new political party called the Kuomintang, and it is also referred to as the Chinese Nationalist Party. His goals were to maintain Chinese culture, but to work towards expelling Europeans through industrialization and political modernization. His rebellion caused Emperor Puyi to abdicate, but it took some time before he was able to hold enough authority to actually lead China. Even when he did, however, Sun Yat-sen struggled to maintain control of the country, and eventually he stepped down from leadership of the Kuomintang party. Afterwards, civil war would rage from 1927 to 1949 between a new leader of the Kuomintang party. His name was Chiang Kai-shek, and against the Chinese Communist Party, referred to as the CCP, led by a young Mao Zedong. As we will see in chapter 7.5, this rift will leave China vulnerable to Japanese aggression in 2 world wars, but we will wait till we get to that unit to discuss. And if you're wondering why there's a United States flag in there too and a Soviet Union flag, it gets complicated. As the process of modernization was undertaken across China, not everyone was ready to disregard almost 300 years of Qing cultural tradition or 5,000 years of Chinese culture. This would make China kin to another struggling empire, the Ottomans. Many of the internal and external pressures of the Qing dynasty were shared with the Ottoman Empire. In this case, attempts were made to lessen the impact of cultural diversity, a very difficult feat for an empire comprised of Arabs, Turks, Kurds, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and a variety of other influences. Turkification caused resentment in minority populations, some of which, as you can see from the chart, were not always in the minority. Armenians in particular resisted Turkification and will definitely pay heavily for this in the Armenian Genocide of 1917. More on this in chapter 7.8. External pressures, once again, Europeans. Economic imperialism, free trade regimes, and capitulations like extraterritoriality limited the ability of the Ottoman Empire to industrialize. That being said, World War I saw a temporary reinvigoration of the Ottomans as the empire saw an opportunity to throw off the yoke of England and France by joining the Central Powers. Unfortunately for them, this will be the side of the war that loses, minus Italy, and the Ottoman Empire will be broken up and divided into something we will refer to as mandates. However, during World War I, a leader named Mustafa Kemal, more commonly referred to as Ataturk, took the helm of the Turkish national movement and defeated the British in 1921. This will make the Republic of Turkey the first to gain its independence from foreign powers in 1923. We have one more set of key concepts left. The West dominated the global political order at the beginning of the 20th century, but both land-based and maritime empires gave way to new states by the century's end. The question is, who are they? And to review, here they are. The Qing Empire becomes the Republic of China in 1911. The Russian Empire becomes the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in 1917, although technically it doesn't become the USSR officially until 1922. It just becomes communist in 1917. And then the Ottoman Empire becomes Turkey in 1923, and Iraq, Syria, Jordan, etc. will be new nations that eventually will come out of this as well. This officially wraps up the key concepts and information for 7.1. I'll see you in class.